In the small town of Willow Creek, life moved at a comfortable pace. The streets were lined with old trees, and the air always carried the faint smell of freshly baked bread from the local bakery. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and people greeted strangers with polite smiles. But even in this seemingly peaceful town, there were cracks beneath the surface, moments when kindness gave way to cruelty, and quiet struggles went unnoticed. Willow Creek High School was no different. For most students, it was just another building filled with lockers, classrooms, and the usual teenage drama. But for one girl, every day felt like climbing a mountain. Her name was Emily, and she walked through the halls leaning on a cane. She had cerebral palsy, which made moving around difficult, but she never let that stop her. Emily was determined to live her life as fully as anyone else. She worked hard in school, smiled often, and tried not to let anything bring her down. Still, being different wasn't easy, especially in high school. Emily's cane was more than just an object. It was part of who she was. Without it, walking would be nearly impossible. Every step she took required effort, focus, and strength. Yet, despite how much she relied on it, some kids didn't see it as something important. They saw it as something funny. They whispered behind her back, imitated the way she walked, or sometimes outright laughed at her. Emily tried to ignore them, telling herself they weren't worth her time. But deep inside, their words stung. One chilly autumn afternoon, the schoolyard buzzed with activity. Students sat in clusters under the shade of towering oak trees, chatting about weekend plans, or scrolling through their phones. Emily found a quiet spot on a wooden bench near the edge of the yard. She needed a moment to rest after navigating the crowded hallways during lunch break. Her legs ached, and her arms felt heavy from gripping the cane all morning. Sitting there, she closed her eyes briefly, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. But peace rarely lasts long in places like this. A group of boys approached, led by Jake, who was known for his loud laugh and mean streak. He wasn't the tallest guy in school, but he acted like he ruled the place. His friends followed him everywhere, eager to join in whenever he decided to cause trouble. Today, Emily was their target. At first, they stood a few feet away, whispering and snickering. Then Jake stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Hey, look at this," he said loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "She can't even sit without her stick." His friends laughed, and Emily froze. She tightened her grip on the cane, hoping they'd lose interest and move on. But Jake wasn't done. Before she could react, he reached out and grabbed the cane right out of her hand. Startled, Emily gasped, reaching for it instinctively. But Jake held it high above his head, keeping it far out of reach. "What's wrong?" he teased, his voice dripping with mockery. "Can't stand without your little helper?" His friends cheered him on, egging him to keep going. Someone even started recording the scene on their phone. Emily felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. She hated feeling helpless, but what could she do? Standing up to someone like Jake seemed impossible. Instead, she stayed seated, staring at him with a mix of defiance and desperation. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't solve anything. It would only give him more ammunition. As the laughter grew louder, a figure emerged from the crowd. Raven, a black girl with curly hair pulled into a ponytail, stepped forward. She wasn't particularly close to Emily, but she couldn't stand by and watch this happen. Raven had always been someone who spoke her mind, whether people liked it or not. And today she had something to say. Without hesitation, she pushed past the onlookers until she stood directly in front of Jake. Her dark eyes locked onto his, unflinching. "Give it back," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Or what?" he shot back, tossing the cane to one of his buddies. "You gonna cry too?" Raven didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, her body language radiating confidence. When she finally spoke again, her voice was calm but firm. "I'm not here to play games. That belongs to her, and you're going to return it. Now." The crowd fell silent, sensing that something big was about to happen. For once, Jake didn't have a quick comeback. Instead, he hesitated, glancing at his friends for support. But Raven wasn't waiting around for permission. In one swift motion, she moved toward the boy holding the cane and snatched it away before he could react. She handed it back to Emily, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Here," Raven said softly, offering a small smile. "You okay?" Emily nodded, though her heart was still racing. She wanted to thank Raven, but words escaped her. Meanwhile, Raven turned her attention back to Jake, her expression hardening once again. "You think messing with someone weaker makes you tough?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Newsflash, it makes you pathetic." Jake opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. The crowd murmured nervously, unsure of what to do next. Some students began to clap quietly, while others simply watched in awe. By the time teachers arrived to break things up, the damage, or rather the lesson, had already been done. What happened next would change everything, not just for Emily and Raven, but for the entire school. The laughter in the schoolyard grew louder as Jake held the cane high above his head, taunting Emily with every passing second. The other boys around him cheered him on, their voices blending into a cruel chorus that echoed across the courtyard. Some of them even started mimicking the way Emily walked, exaggerating her movements to make her look clumsy and awkward. It was like they were putting on a show, and Emily was the unwilling star. Emily sat frozen on the bench, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to demand her cane back, but the words caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bench for support. Without her cane, standing up felt nearly impossible. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to try, but fear kept her rooted to the spot. What if she fell? What if they laughed even harder? The crowd around them began to grow. Students who had been sitting quietly eating their lunches now stood up to see what all the commotion was about. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. Others joined in the teasing, laughing along with Jake and his friends. A few pulled out their phones, recording the scene to share later. For Emily, it felt like the entire world was closing in on her. Jake wasn't done yet. He tossed the cane to one of his buddies, who caught it effortlessly and held it behind his back. "Come on, Em," Jake sneered, leaning closer to her. "If you want it so bad, come get it." His friends erupted into laughter again, egging him on. Emily clenched her jaw, trying not to let the tears brimming in her eyes spill over. She hated feeling powerless, but there was nothing she could do. Not alone, anyway. That's when Raven stepped forward. She didn't shout or push anyone aside dramatically. Instead, she walked calmly through the growing crowd, her steps steady and deliberate. People noticed her immediately, not because she made a scene, but because of the look on her face. Her dark eyes burned with a quiet intensity, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. Anyone who saw her knew she meant business. When Raven reached the center of the circle, she stopped directly in front of Jake. There was no hesitation in her movements, no trace of doubt. She stood tall, meeting his gaze head-on. For a moment, the noise around them faded slightly, as if everyone was holding their breath to see what would happen next. "Give it back," Raven said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. She didn't raise her tone or add any unnecessary drama. She simply stated her demand, clear and direct. Jake blinked, caught off guard for a split second. Then he smirked, clearly amused by her audacity. "Or what?" he shot back, tossing the cane to another one of his friends. "You gonna cry too?" Raven didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step closer, closing the distance between them. Her presence seemed to fill the space, making Jake take a half step back without realizing it. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said, her voice low but sharp. "That belongs to her, and you're about to hand it over or deal with me." The crowd murmured nervously, sensing the tension rising. Some students exchanged glances while others leaned in closer, eager to see how this would play out. Jake hesitated for a moment, glancing at his friends for reassurance. They grinned back at him, encouraging him to keep going. But something about Raven's unwavering confidence made him uneasy. For a brief moment, Jake considered backing down. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, and for once, he wasn't sure he liked the attention. But pride got the better of him. Smirking again, he crossed his arms over his chest. "Make me," he challenged, tossing the cane to someone else behind him. That was all the provocation Raven needed. Without wasting another second, she moved quickly, cutting through the group until she reached the boy holding the cane. Before he could react, she snatched it out of his hands and turned back toward Emily. The whole thing happened so fast that no one had time to stop her. When she handed the cane to Emily, her expression softened slightly. "Here," she said, quietly, offering a small smile. "You okay?" Emily nodded, though her hands still shook as she gripped the cane tightly. She wanted to say thank you, to express how grateful she was, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she managed a weak smile, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Meanwhile, Raven turned her attention back to Jake. Her calm demeanor shifted, replaced by a fierce determination. "You think picking on someone weaker makes you tough?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to carry over the murmurs of the crowd. "Newsflash, it makes you pathetic." Jake stammered, caught off guard by her boldness. For the first time, his bravado faltered. He glanced around at the faces surrounding him, searching for support but found only silence. Even his friends seemed less enthusiastic now, shuffling awkwardly as the reality of the situation sank in. By the time teachers arrived on the scene, the confrontation had already begun to wind down. Jake and his crew slunk away, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Emily stayed seated on the bench, clutching her cane tightly, while Raven stood nearby, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Though the immediate danger had passed, the ripple effects of what had just happened were only beginning to unfold. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the school, sparking conversations among students and staff alike. Some praised Raven for standing up to the bullies, calling her brave and heroic. Others criticized her for escalating the situation, saying violence wasn't the answer. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain: something had shifted in the air. For Emily, the experience left her shaken but also strangely hopeful. Seeing Raven stand up for her reminded her that she wasn't completely alone, that there were people willing to fight for what was right, even when it was hard. And for Raven, the act of stepping in wasn't just about helping Emily. It was about sending a message to everyone watching. Standing up to bullies wasn't easy, but staying silent wasn't an option either. As the day wore on, whispers filled the hallways, and the story continued to spread. Little did anyone know, this single. The schoolyard was buzzing with energy, but not the good kind. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone had their eyes glued to Raven as she stood face to face with Jake, her expression unshakable. It wasn't just bravery that radiated from her. It was something deeper, like she'd been waiting for this moment all her life. And maybe she had. Jake, on the other hand, looked less sure of himself now. His cocky grin faltered under Raven's piercing gaze. He glanced at his friends again, hoping for backup, but they were unusually quiet. Even the ones who usually egged him on seemed hesitant to say anything. The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably, some students whispering to each other while others just stared wide-eyed, unsure what would happen next. "You think you're tough?" Raven asked, her voice sharp and steady. She didn't shout, but every word carried weight, like she was speaking directly to everyone listening. "You think taking someone's cane makes you strong? Let me tell you something. Real strength doesn't come from picking on people who can't fight back. Real strength is standing up for what's right." Her words hit hard, especially because no one could argue with them. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, his usual quick remarks failed him. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest, trying to look confident, but it was clear he was rattled. Raven didn't wait for him to recover. She turned slightly so she could address the entire group gathered around them. "How many of you are standing here laughing or recording this? How many of you knew it was wrong but didn't do anything about it?" Her voice softened a little, but it still carried authority. "I'm not saying I'm perfect, I've made mistakes too. But there comes a point where we have to decide, are we going to be part of the problem, or are we going to be part of..." The solution? A few students shuffled awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Others nodded slowly as if they were finally seeing things differently. Some even looked ashamed, realizing how silent they'd been during the whole ordeal. Raven wasn't just talking to Jake anymore. She was talking to everyone who had chosen to watch instead of act. Jake tried to regain control of the situation. "Oh, please," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "You're acting like you're some hero. Big deal." His voice lacked its usual confidence, though, and his attempt to dismiss her only made him look worse. Raven didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she took a step back, giving him space but keeping her focus locked on him. "You don't get to decide what a hero is," she said calmly. "But I'll tell you this. If you keep treating people the way you did today, you're not going to have any friends left. No one respects a bully, Jake, not really." The truth in her words stung more than Jake expected. He glanced at his friends again, searching for reassurance, but they avoided looking at him. One of them even shrugged, as if to say, "She's got a point." Jake clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He wanted to lash out, to say something cutting, but he couldn't find the words. For the first time, he felt cornered, not by Raven's physical presence, but by the force of her conviction. By now, teachers were starting to approach the scene. Someone must have alerted them about the commotion, and their arrival brought a new level of seriousness to the situation. A couple of staff members pushed through the crowd, their faces stern as they demanded to know what was going on. Jake and his friends immediately backed off, muttering excuses under their breath. They acted like they hadn't done anything wrong, but their body language told a different story. Emily, still sitting on the bench, watched everything unfold with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She felt relieved that the confrontation was over, but she also felt exposed. Dozens of pairs of eyes had witnessed her humiliation, and even though Raven had stepped in to help, she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was judging her. Still, there was something else, a tiny flicker of hope. Seeing Raven stand up for her reminded Emily that kindness existed, even in places where it sometimes felt scarce. As the teachers began separating the students and asking questions, Raven stayed close to Emily. She didn't hover, but she made sure Emily knew she wasn't alone. When one of the teachers asked Emily if she was okay, she hesitated before nodding. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm fine." But Raven spoke up before anyone could walk away. "She might say she's fine, but she shouldn't have had to go through that in the first place," Raven said firmly, addressing the teacher. "This isn't just about today, it's about how people treat each other every day. If we don't start holding people accountable, stuff like this will keep happening." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes on a clipboard. "Thank you for stepping in," she said to Raven. "We'll make sure this gets handled properly." While the teachers dealt with Jake and his friends, Raven sat down beside Emily on the bench. She didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Instead, she simply offered her presence. After a moment, she said softly, "You don't deserve to be treated like that. Ever." Emily looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Why did you do it?" she asked after a pause. "You barely know me." Raven shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Because it was the right thing to do. No one should have to put up with that kind of nonsense. Besides," she paused, glancing around at the dispersing crowd, "if we don't stick together, who will?" Emily didn't respond right away. She just stared at the ground, letting Raven's words sink in. For years, she'd convinced herself that dealing with bullies was something she had to handle on her own. She'd told herself it was easier to stay quiet, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But seeing Raven take a stand made her realize something important. She didn't have to face these challenges alone. As the afternoon wore on, the schoolyard gradually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an event. Students went back to their conversations, pretending nothing had happened, but the mood felt different. There was an underlying tension, a sense that things wouldn't go back to the way they were before. Some kids whispered about what they'd seen, while others openly praised Raven for her courage. A few even approached Emily later, offering apologies for not stepping in earlier. For Raven, the incident was far from over. She knew there would be consequences for confronting Jake the way she did. Maybe she'd get detention, or maybe the school would call her parents. None of that mattered to her. What mattered was that she'd done the right thing, and she hoped it would inspire others to do the same. As she walked home later that day, Raven replayed the events in her mind. She thought about Emily's quiet gratitude and the way the crowd had reacted when she called out Jake's behavior. She thought about the teachers promising to take action and wondered if they actually would. Most of all, she thought about how one small act of defiance could spark change, not just for Emily, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Little did she know her actions that day would ripple outward, touching lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The confrontation in the schoolyard didn't end quietly. As Raven handed the cane back to Emily and turned her sharp gaze toward Jake, the tension between them was palpable. The crowd of students that had gathered around them was eerily silent. Now, their earlier laughter replaced by a mix of anticipation and unease. Everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. Jake tried to recover his usual bravado, but it was clear he was struggling. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at his friends for support. They weren't laughing anymore. Some looked uncomfortable, others downright guilty, but none of them stepped forward to back him up. For once, Jake was on his own. Raven didn't give him time to regroup. She took a step closer, her presence commanding enough to make him flinch slightly. "You think you're tough?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "Taking someone's cane away, making fun of how they walk, that doesn't make you strong, it makes you weak." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest, trying to look defiant. It didn't work. The gesture only made him seem smaller somehow. Raven wasn't done yet. "You want to act like the big man on campus?" she continued, her tone firm but not overly loud. "But all you are is a bully, and bullies don't scare people, they discuss them." Her words hit hard, not just for Jake, but for everyone listening. Some students nodded slowly while others exchanged guilty glances. A few even whispered apologies to Emily under their breath, though she barely heard them. She was still clutching, her cane tightly, her knuckles white from the effort. But there was something different about her now, a flicker of strength where moments ago there had been fear. Jake stammered, clearly caught off guard. I wasn't scared," he muttered lamely, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "You're the one causing problems here." Raven raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Oh, really? So snatching a cane away from someone who needs it isn't a problem? Laughing at them isn't a problem? Maybe you should tell that to the teachers when they get here." As if on cue, two teachers rushed onto the scene, their faces stern as they surveyed the chaos. One of them, Mr. Carter, a tall man with graying hair, immediately demanded to know what was going on. Students began talking over each other, some pointing fingers at Jake, others defending themselves or shifting blame. The noise grew louder until Raven raised her hand, silencing the crowd almost instantly. "It's simple," she said, looking directly at Mr. Carter. "Jake and his friends took Emily's cane and started teasing her. I stepped in because nobody else did." Mr. Carter frowned, glancing at Jake, who suddenly found the ground very interesting. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice low but firm. For a moment, Jake hesitated. He glanced at his friends again, hoping for some kind of lifeline, but they avoided his gaze. Finally, he muttered, "It was just a joke." "A joke?" Raven interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Do you see anyone laughing now? Do you think making someone feel worthless is funny?" Jake didn't answer. Instead, he shuffled, his feet awkwardly, his cheeks turning red. The teacher sighed heavily, shaking his head. "All right, everyone involved is coming with me. We'll sort this out in the office." As the teachers led Jake and his friends away, the crowd began to disperse. Some students lingered, whispering among themselves, while others headed back to class. Raven stayed behind, crouching down beside Emily, who was still sitting on the bench. Her hands trembled as she gripped her cane, but she managed a small smile when Raven looked at her. "You okay?" Raven asked softly, her tone gentle now that the immediate danger had passed. Emily nodded, though her eyes were still glistening with unshed tears. Yeah, thanks to you. Raven shrugged, brushing off the gratitude like it was nothing. Don't mention it. Seriously, though, you shouldn't have to put up with stuff like that. Ever. Emily swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I know, but I didn't think anyone would care. Well, I care, Raven said firmly, and so do a lot of other people, even if they don't always show it. You're not alone, all right? Emily nodded again, feeling a warmth spread through her chest despite everything that had happened. For years, she'd convinced herself that dealing with bullies was part of life, that she had to handle it on her own. But seeing Raven stand up for her, hearing those simple yet powerful words made her realize something important. She didn't have to face these challenges alone. Later that afternoon, word of the incident spread like wildfire through Willow Creek High School. By the time classes resumed after lunch, nearly everyone knew what had happened in the schoolyard. Some students praised Raven for her courage, calling her brave and saying she'd done the right thing. Others criticized her, claiming she'd gone too far by confronting Jake physically, even though she hadn't actually thrown a punch. Still, the majority of the conversation revolved around one question. Why hadn't anyone stepped in sooner? The days that followed, the fallout from the confrontation became impossible to ignore. Jake and his friends were called into the principal's office multiple times, facing disciplinary action for their behavior. Jake received detention for a month, while his friends got off with warnings and community service assignments within the school. Though none of them publicly apologized, their actions spoke volumes. They avoided eye contact with Emily in the hallways, kept their distance during lunch, and stopped teasing other students altogether. Meanwhile, Raven faced consequences of her own. When the administration reviewed the incident, they decided to give her detention for engaging in conflict with another student. She accepted the punishment without complaint, knowing full well that standing up for Emily might come with a price. But she also refused to apologize for what she'd done. I'd do it again in a heartbeat, she told the principal during their meeting. Because letting someone treat another person like that, that's not okay. Not here, not anywhere. Her response earned mixed reactions from the staff. Some admired her conviction, quietly agreeing that she'd acted out of necessity rather than malice. Others worried that rewarding such behavior might encourage more fights. Regardless of their opinions, however, one thing was certain: Raven's actions had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. For Emily, the aftermath of the incident brought both relief and frustration. On one hand, she felt safer knowing that Jake and his crew wouldn't bother her again. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the system itself was flawed. Detention and warnings seemed like band-aid solutions to a much deeper problem, one that required real change, not just temporary fixes. That realization planted a seed in her mind. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about ways to address bullying in the school, not just for her own sake, but for others who might be suffering silently. She mentioned the idea to Raven during one of their conversations, half expecting her to dismiss it as unrealistic. Instead, Raven lit up with excitement. That's brilliant, she said, leaning forward eagerly. We could start something like a group or a campaign to raise awareness and support people who are being bullied. What if we got the whole school involved? Emily hesitated, unsure if she was ready to take on such a big project. Do you really think people would care enough to join? I think they already do, Raven replied confidently. They just need someone to show them the way. With that spark of inspiration, the two girls began brainstorming ideas. They reached out to teachers, pitched their concept to the student council, and even drafted a proposal outlining their goals. To their surprise and delight, the school administration agreed to support their initiative, offering resources and guidance to help bring their vision to life. What started as a single act of defiance in the schoolyard soon evolved into something much bigger. The Anti-Bullying Coalition, as they called it, became a beacon of hope for students who had long felt powerless against cruelty and injustice. And at the heart of it all were two unlikely allies, a girl who refused to stay silent and another who finally found her voice. Together, they proved that even the smallest acts of courage could ignite lasting change. The days that followed the incident in the schoolyard were anything but ordinary. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire through Willow Creek High School. By Monday morning, it felt like everyone had an opinion about it. Some students praised Raven for standing up to Jake and his crew, calling her brave and saying she'd done what no one else had the guts to do. Others criticized her, claiming she'd made things worse by starting a fight. Teachers whispered about it in the staff room, and even parents began discussing it at the grocery store or during weekend soccer games. For Emily, life at school changed in subtle but significant ways. Before the incident, she'd often felt invisible, like she blended into the background of hallways and classrooms. Now people noticed her. Some offered kind smiles when they passed her in the corridor, while others avoided eye contact altogether, maybe feeling guilty for not stepping in when she needed help. A few kids even went out of their way to say hello or hold open doors for her. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Raven, on the other hand, found herself at the center of attention, and not all of it was positive. While many admired her courage, some teachers and administrators saw her actions as disruptive. During a meeting with the principal, Raven was told she would receive detention for engaging in physical conflict with another student. She didn't argue. She knew there would be consequences for snatching the cane back from Jake's friend. But she also didn't apologize. When the principal asked if she regretted her actions, Raven shook her head firmly. "No," she said, without hesitation. "I don't regret standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. If doing the right thing means getting detention, then so be it." Her response earned her a mix of reactions. Some teachers nodded approvingly, quietly impressed by her conviction. Others frowned, concerned that rewarding such behavior might encourage more fights. Still, Raven's stance resonated with a lot of students. They started seeing her differently, not just as the outspoken girl who always spoke her mind, but as someone who truly believed in fairness and justice. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends tried to act like nothing had happened. At first, they laughed off the incident, telling anyone who would listen that Raven had overreacted and made a big deal out of nothing. But as the week went on, cracks began to show in their bravado. Jake stopped sitting with his usual group at lunch, opting instead to eat alone or hang out near the gym where fewer people could see him. His friends grew quieter too, avoiding conversations about the confrontation whenever possible. Even their classmates seemed less interested in joining their antics. Slowly but surely, the power dynamic that Jake had relied on for so long started to crumble. One day, during third period English class, something unexpected happened. The teacher handed out an assignment asking students to write about a time they witnessed or experienced courage. Most groaned, thinking it was just another boring essay topic. But for Emily, the task felt deeply personal. She thought long and hard about what to write. Finally deciding to share her side of the story from the schoolyard, she wrote honestly about how scared she'd been when Jake took her cane, how humiliated she'd felt when the crowd laughed at her, and how Raven's intervention had given her hope when she needed it most. When the essays were returned, Emily's paper received high praise from the teacher, who read parts of it aloud, with Emily's permission, to highlight its emotional depth. Hearing her words spoken in front of the class was nerve-wracking, but it was also empowering, for the first time Emily realized that her voice mattered, that speaking up could inspire others to reflect on their own actions. Inspired by Emily's courage, a few other students began sharing their own stories. One girl talked about being teased for wearing secondhand clothes because her family couldn't afford new ones. Another boy admitted he used to join in on bullying until he realized how much harm it caused. These confessions created a ripple effect, sparking conversations that had been buried for far too long. Students who had once stayed silent now found themselves opening up, realizing they weren't alone in feeling hurt or powerless. It wasn't long before these discussions spilled beyond individual classrooms. A group of students, including Emily and Raven, decided to take things further. They approached the school administration with an idea: to start an anti-bullying coalition. Their goal was simple: to create a safe space where students could talk about their experiences, learn how to support one another, and work together to make the school a kinder place. To everyone's surprise, the administration agreed, offering resources and guidance to get the initiative off the ground. The first meeting of the coalition drew a larger crowd than anyone expected. Students from different grades and social groups showed up, eager to contribute. Raven became one of the founding members, using her natural leadership skills to guide discussions and keep things focused. Emily joined too, finding strength in numbers and purpose in helping others. Together they brainstormed ideas for workshops, awareness campaigns, and peer mentoring programs. One of their earliest projects was creating posters with messages like, "Kindness starts here" and "Stand up, speak out." They hung them throughout the school, turning blank walls into reminders of the change they wanted to see. Another project involved organizing a day of unity, where students wore mismatched socks to celebrate individuality and acceptance. It was lighthearted yet meaningful, and it brought a sense of camaraderie to the campus that hadn't existed before. As weeks turned into months, the impact of the coalition became undeniable. Fights in the hallway became less frequent, and cliques that once dominated the cafeteria began to blur. Kids who had never spoken to each other started forming friendships based on mutual respect rather than popularity contests. Even Jake seemed to fade into the background, keeping to himself and avoiding trouble. He never publicly apologized for his role in the schoolyard incident, but his behavior shifted noticeably. Whether it was guilt, fear of backlash, or genuine reflection, he stopped targeting vulnerable students and kept his head down. For Raven, watching these changes unfold filled her with pride, but also a sense of responsibility. She knew the work wasn't done. Bullying wouldn't disappear overnight, and old habits were hard to break. Still, she believed in the power of persistence. Every small victory mattered, whether it was stopping a cruel joke before it spread or encouraging someone to sit with a lonely classmate at lunch. Emily, too, discovered a newfound confidence. She still faced challenges every day, both physical and emotional, but she no longer let them define her. With the support of the coalition and friends like Raven, she learned to embrace her uniqueness instead of hiding it. She even gave a short speech at a school assembly, thanking everyone who had helped turn her painful experience into a catalyst for positive change. By the end of the school year, Willow Creek High School felt like a different place. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of tension and occasional misunderstandings, but the culture had shifted. People thought twice before making fun of someone for being different. They looked out for one another, stepping in when they saw someone struggling. And most importantly, they remembered that kindness, courage, and unity could overcome even the toughest challenges. What started as one girl standing up for another had blossomed into something much bigger, a movement fueled by empathy and determination. Though the journey was far from over, the seeds of change had been planted, and for Raven, Emily, and everyone else involved, that was enough to keep going. Winter arrived in Willow Creek, bringing with it a crisp chill and a fresh blanket of snow that transformed the town into a serene wonderland. The schoolyard, once filled with golden autumn leaves, was now a sparkling white canvas where students left trails of footprints as they made their way to class. Inside the halls of Willow Creek High School, things felt different too, not just because of the holiday decorations strung up by the art club, but because of the lingering effects of the changes that had taken root over the past few months. TO, Anti-Bullying Coalition, had become more than just a project. It was a cornerstone of the school's culture now. Posters with messages like "Be kind" and "Your voice matters" adorned the walls, serving as constant reminders of the work everyone was doing together. Students who had once been bystanders were now active participants in creating a safer environment. Teachers noticed the shift too: fewer complaints about bullying, more collaboration among students, and an overall sense of community that hadn't existed before. Emily found herself walking through those halls with a confidence she'd never felt before. Her cane still clicked against the tiled floors, marking each step she took, but the stares and whispers that used to follow her had faded. Instead, people greeted her warmly or simply went about their day without giving her a second glance, and that was exactly what she wanted. She wasn't invisible anymore. but she also wasn't seen as someone to pity or mock. She was just Emily, a student like anyone else, navigating life in her own way. One afternoon, as she headed toward the library during free period, Emily spotted Raven sitting at a table near the window. Raven was bent over a notebook, scribbling furiously, her curly hair tied back in its usual ponytail. When Emily approached, Raven looked up and smiled. "Hey," she said, pushing the notebook aside. "What's up?" "Nothing much," Emily replied, sliding into the seat across from her. After a pause, she added, "I just wanted to say thanks again. For everything." Raven waved her hand dismissively. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should have done." "But not everyone would have," Emily said quietly. "That's why it meant so much." Raven didn't respond right away. She glanced out the window, watching flakes of snow drift lazily to the ground. Finally, she said, "You know, when I stepped in that day, I wasn't thinking about being some kind of hero. I was just mad. Mad that those guys thought they could treat you like that and get away with it. But honestly, the real change came from you." "From me?" Emily asked. Surprised, yeah. Raven nodded. "After everything that happened, you didn't shut down. You joined the coalition, you shared your story, and you kept showing up even when it wasn't easy. That takes guts. And because of that, other people started speaking up too. It's like you showed everyone that standing tall doesn't mean you have to do it alone." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much her actions had inspired others, or how much Raven believed in her. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," she said softly. Raven grinned. "Well, maybe we're both just stubborn enough to make things happen." They laughed, the sound light and genuine, filling the quiet library with warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke, content to sit there as the snow continued to fall outside. It was strange, Emily thought, how two people who barely knew each other at the start of the year had become such an important part of each other's lives. Stranger still was how one difficult moment had led to something so meaningful. As the weeks passed, the coalition continued to grow. More students joined, eager to contribute their ideas and energy. They organized events like a storytelling night where kids could share personal experiences in a supportive setting, and a mentorship program pairing older students with younger ones who needed guidance. Even teachers got involved, hosting workshops on conflict resolution and empathy. Slowly but surely, these efforts created ripples that extended far beyond the school itself. Parents began noticing the difference too. At parent-teacher conferences, they remarked on how their children seemed happier and more confident. Some even mentioned hearing stories about kindness and teamwork around the dinner table, things they hadn't expected to hear from teenagers. The local newspaper ran a feature on the coalition, highlighting its impact on the community. Suddenly, Willow Creek High School wasn't just known for its sports teams or academic achievements. It was becoming a model for how schools could foster compassion and understanding. Of course, challenges still arose. Not every student embraced the changes, and there were occasional setbacks. Old habits sometimes resurfaced, and new conflicts emerged that tested the coalition's resolve. But instead of ignoring these issues, the group tackled them head-on, using them as opportunities to learn and grow. They reminded themselves that progress wasn't linear, it was messy and unpredictable, but worth fighting for all the same. By spring, the transformation was undeniable. The schoolyard buzzed with laughter and conversation, no longer overshadowed by tension or fear. Kids played games together, helped one another carry books, and cheered each other on during track meets and science fairs. Even Jake, who had largely kept to himself since the incident, started participating in small ways. He volunteered to help set up chairs for assemblies and occasionally joined group projects without complaint. While he never became close friends with anyone, his presence no longer carried the weight of intimidation it once did. On the last day of school, the coalition held a special gathering in the auditorium to celebrate everything they'd accomplished throughout the year. Students, teachers, and even a few parents packed the rows of seats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the program to begin. Emily stood backstage with Raven, nervously clutching a folded piece of paper in her hands. You. Ready? Raven asked, nudging her gently. I think so, Emily replied, though her voice wavered slightly. It's just, this feels like a big deal. It is a big deal, Raven said with a reassuring smile. But you've got this. Trust me. When it was time, Emily stepped onto the stage, her cane tapping lightly against the wooden floor. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. Hi, everyone, she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. A year ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here talking to all of you. In fact, I spent most of my time hoping no one would notice me at all. She paused, glancing out at the sea of faces looking back at her. But then something happened that changed everything. Someone stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. And because of that, I realized I wasn't alone. None of us are. We all have struggles, fears, and moments when we feel like giving up. But if we stick together, if we choose kindness over cruelty, courage over silence, we can create something amazing. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering loudly as Emily stepped back and let Raven take the stage next. Raven's speech was shorter but equally powerful. She reminded everyone that the work wasn't finished, that building a better world required constant effort. Change starts with us, she said firmly. Not just today, not just this year, but every single day moving forward. Let's keep proving that it's possible. As the event wrapped up, students filed out of the auditorium, buzzing with excitement and pride. Outside, the sun shone brightly, melting patches of leftover snow and signaling the promise of warmer days ahead. Emily and Raven lingered near the entrance, watching as their classmates scattered across the lawn, laughing and hugging goodbye. You know, Emily said after a while, this feels like the beginning of something, not the end. Raven nodded, smiling. Exactly, we're just getting started. And with that, they turned and walked away side by side, ready to face whatever came next.